Australia is under a state of emergency as hundreds of wildfires burn across the country right now. Those fires have ripped through towns and destroyed dozens of homes, and of course this is just before Christmas. Firefighters there are working to contain the bushfires. Leah Harris from our partners at Network 10 there in Australia has this story.
3 days until Christmas, and these families have lost everything. In the town of Balmoral, southwest of Sydney, many residents returned today to find their homes and businesses burned to the ground in the relentless Greenwattle Creek blaze yesterday. This family stayed and fought for their home until the last second, fleeing with only the clothes on their backs as fire hit from all directions.
It started coming in from the easterly side and on the westerly side at the same time. If it was on one front, we would have successfully defended this property. But as it stood on 3 fronts, we had no chance.
Their property wasn't insured and they've lost 20 years of precious memories.
Lots and lots of memories.
Yeah.
Memories.
A lot of irreplaceable items, family heirlooms, it's just, things that cannot be replaced.
The total number of properties lost in the area is not yet known, but it's expected to be more than 20. Across the state, the past 24 hours has been devastating.
We are talking dozens of properties, dozens of buildings. As a matter of fact, right across all the fire grounds of the last 24 hours, we could be talking about another 100 buildings being added to the state tally so far this season.
While residents surveyed the damage this morning, 30 additional Canadian firefighters and 9 US personnel touched down in Sydney to help relieve our exhausted volunteers.
I'm willing to help wherever you guys need me.
While Prime Minister Scott Morrison promised to give firefighters anything they ask for.
Whatever they need, whatever they think they need to bolster, support, sustain the operations that they're running, they simply need to ask, and they'll get that support.
More than 100 bush and grass fires continue to burn across the state. About 50 are still not contained. In Shoalhaven last night, a fire-generated thunderstorm formed, causing frightening scenes.
There's a big westerly coming up now. It's not going to help anyone.
Despite the cooler weather across the state over the next few days, firefighters won't be slowing down. They'll need to take advantage of the favourable conditions to try to get on top of these fires. But what they really need is rain, and that could be weeks away.
We've got to keep in mind we're not expecting any rainfall to make any meaningful difference to these fires until January, February. That's still a way to go. We're still talking 4 to 6 weeks at best before we start to see a meaningful reprieve in the weather.
Until then, residents will continue to prepare for the worst, as they've done already for far too long. Leah Harris for 10 News First.
And we really want to understand what's taking place here. So to discuss this, we've brought in climate scientist Lucky Tran on the left of your screen and CBS News contributing meteorologist Jeff Berardelli, both of you experts in various ways, in ways that relate to the climate, Australia, climate change, and really the science behind this. And Lucky, I want to begin with you as someone who is from Adelaide and lived in part of Australia. What is this? What are we looking at here that goes beyond your seasonal wildfires?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Honestly, as an Australian and as a scientist and as a biologist who's away and looking at what's happening in the country, it's so heartbreaking for me. Really, what we're seeing is something that I haven't seen in my lifetime, is that, the severity of the summer and the impact that is having, and it's early in the summer, is something we really haven't seen before. So just this last week, we saw Australia break its average temperature record. It hit above 106 degrees Fahrenheit on Tuesday. Just 1 day later, it broke that record again at 108 degrees Fahrenheit. And this comes after last summer being one of the warmest summers on average ever in Australia. We're seeing bushfires all around the country, hundreds of bushfires engulfing the suburbs and the hills around the major capital cities. The scale is unprecedented. And, in Sydney, in New South Wales, the state with the most fires, the area that's being burned is the size of Rhode Island. It's really large and impactful. And on a personal level, I'm seeing friends This time of year, it's the holidays. We love going to see friends and family at home, right? My friends are flying on planes, they're snapping pictures from the air, and they're seeing their homes and, the surrounding areas on fire literally from the plane. So this is a really powerful, devastating impact that we are seeing in the country right now.
So, Jeff, what's happening here? Lucky's referring to just general temperatures being higher. It is a seasonal kind of, a normal type of seasonal activity, but what's different?
So first of all, this heat wave is fairly insane. That's how intense it is. He mentioned the average temperature. This is the average temperature of the whole country that broke a record, and it broke a record by a whole degree Celsius, so 2 degrees Fahrenheit the first day, and then it broke it again by 3 degrees Fahrenheit the second day. So the average of all the high temperatures across the whole country. As a meteorologist and someone who's studied this my whole life, I couldn't have even believed that could have happened. To give you an idea, I'm looking at social media, looking at what scientists are saying about this, some of the best climate scientists in the world. They're saying that even right now, this is likely a 1 in 1,000 year event. About 100 years ago, when we hadn't warmed the planet, it likely was virtually impossible. And if we warm the planet by another degree Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, it could be a 1 in 10 year event, to give you an idea of how unprecedented this is. Now, I do have a graphic, and we might have showed it already, I might have missed it, but it shows you the natural reason why something like this might happen. So, these type of heat waves will happen naturally due to something called the Indian Ocean dipole. And what it is warmer water in the western Indian Ocean and cooler water in the eastern Indian Ocean. That causes sinking air across places like Indonesia and also, and you can see the graphic here, and also Australia. That sinking air kind of compresses the air, it dries it out, and it heats it up. So this is somewhat a natural pattern, but on top of it, because of all this background warming we have from climate change, it makes it worse and worse. On top of that, and Lucky, you can chime in on this, there's been a drought for a couple of years, and that intensifies the heat wave too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the drought, and it's really having a real impact on people. That's what we're really worried about. Farmers are worried about it. Everyday people in our cities are worried about it. Something that I really want to underline is that there's a real human impact to what's happening. It's not just something that's happening in the environment that doesn't affect us.
Well, tell us more about that, because we can look at these heat maps. You see the images, and they are stunning. But what is different about the reality for so many Australians, whether they be farmers or, as you mentioned, people in the suburbs who are watching their homes burn? What's changing about life?
Yeah, I think something. So actually, the interesting thing, if you think about what do Australians love to do, there's two things actually: to be in the outdoors, to go to the beach, and to play cricket, which is our equivalent of baseball, the national sport. Over the last week, people are going to the beach, but they're wearing face masks, and actually they're being told you can't be outside because of the air is so polluted from these particles in the air from the bushfires that Australians can't be Australians and do their normal activities.
Yeah, plus it feels like about 130 degrees.
Yeah,
plus the actual air temperatures are 110, 115 degrees, some places hitting 122 degrees. So it's not safe to be outside. No. And that's what we expect going forward with climate change.
But just to kind of underscore what we are saying right now, that conditions are such in Australia that the place is effectively becoming inhabitable.
I wouldn't say uninhabitable, but it's changing our way of life. And so one of the biggest things about climate change is it's one of the biggest public health crises in our time, basically. So what we're seeing in hospital admissions, we're seeing twice as many people going into the ER in hospitals in Sydney because of what's happening with the bushfires, the air quality going down because of the heat stresses. Doctors are really worried about what's happening. So I think business as usual cannot continue. As you can see, people have to adapt their lives, and the healthcare situation is fast becoming difficult for us.
So, Jeff, considering the trajectory here, which does not look good, what type of policies are being considered by a country like Australia? And I'm wondering, Lucky, what you think of their current efforts.
So first of all, let me say, you mentioned uninhabitable. So that is something we're concerned about for the future. James Hansen, one of the most famous climate scientists in the world, says that many parts of this Earth, especially close to the equator, will become uninhabitable because of not just heat, but also desertification. So when you heat the atmosphere and you heat the land, you dry it out such that you can't grow crops anymore. If you can't grow crops anymore, you can't sustain your lifestyle. People no longer will live there. They will start to migrate. So now I'll bring Lucky in to talk about, the policies in Australia and also this idea of the possible migration in certain parts of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, climate change, there have been studies. I'm a refugee myself. I'm a refugee who moved to Australia. We moved because of war, but studies say that hundreds of millions of refugees by the end of the century will be influenced by climate change. And it's really important why we must deal with climate change now, and we must have policies that really help people who will be displaced by all of this chaos that's happening. The thing about the Australian government is, unfortunately, they are in denial about climate change. The Australian Prime Minister just the other week refused to put the link between bushfires and climate change. And the Prime Minister also says that Australia is too small a country to make a difference. When Australia is one of the highest polluters per capita, per person, it exports 3 times as many of pollution in coal. And I was just recently in Madrid at the UN climate meeting where Australian leaders really stalled the negotiations. So that's really troubling for me.
And Scott Morrison finally admitted a couple of days ago, I think, that this could be partly due to climate change. So he seems to be coming around a little bit. Whether or not that will last, or it's just simply because he's put in a spot right now because there are fires all over the country, remains to be seen. But one of the things he mentioned is this crisis that we're going to have in the future of refugees. Right now, a big choice needs to be made. If we keep putting up walls, this crisis is only going to get worse in the future. And there's going to be a point at which countries decide, are we going to open up our arms to people that are fleeing, their situations, partly due to climate change, or are we going to shut ourselves down and try to isolate us? And we're seeing that play out across the world right now.
It'll be a big decision for many nations to face, and that UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says as much, that this will be a major cause for conflict in the future. But it's undoubtedly happening in Australia. I appreciate you both for coming in and helping us understand it just a bit more. Jeff Berardelli and Lucky Tran, thank you both for coming in today.
Thanks for having us on.